Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1150 for February 22nd, 2026. Coming up in a few minutes.
I could not tell that story if people didn't know why bourbon was so important to me in the first place. Because I legit was when I came home from Iraq, Mark, I was devastated. And I could keep a straight face. I could fake it here and there, but inside, man, I was dying. And it was it took that moment for me to really, to move forward.
That's whiskey writer and bourbon guru Fred Minnick. His new book, Bottom Shelf, is part memoir, part bourbon history, and he pulls it all together with the story of his recovery after returning from Iraq, a story that includes a suicide attempt. We'll go in depth with Fred later on. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast, whiskey's longest-running and most awarded podcast series.
Hey, it's Gabriel from Dewar's Whiskey. Here's a quick tip. Whenever you're pouring great whiskey, especially something like Dewar's 12-year, don't overthink it. All you need is a few glasses and a couple of people worth sharing it with. The rest takes care of itself. Back in a bit.
Let's get started with the week's news. The U.S. Supreme Court upended President Donald Trump's tariff scheme Friday with a ruling that Trump exceeded his authority under a national emergencies law. While that may sound like good news, Trump responded by using another federal law to impose a 15% global tariff on all imports, effective this Tuesday. That tariff can only exist for 150 days without congressional review, and it affects the Scotch whisky industry because it raises the UK's tariff rate from 10% to 15%. It'll be up to lower courts to determine whether the government has to refund billions of dollars in tariff revenue to the American importers that paid those tariffs. Reaction to the ruling was quick, but limited to a call for return to zero for zero tariff-free trade by the major whiskey trade associations. Penderyn Distillery CEO Stephen Davies called the new 15% tariff bad news for Welsh whiskey and the entire premium malt sector. He says American consumers will see higher prices and fewer choices as a result. Pernod Ricard reported sales for the first half of its fiscal year this week, and the news was not good. Organic sales were down by almost 6% from the previous year on weak sales of Jameson in the U.S., which declined globally by 7%. But when you take out the weak U.S. results, Jameson sales were actually up globally by 4%. China was also a weak spot for the company. Sales of Martell Cognac and Chivas Regal were down in China, with an overall decline of 28% for the period. CEO Alexander Ricard called the environment volatile and uncertain, but expects sales to improve in the second half of the fiscal year. Suntory Global Spirits reported a stagnant sales year for 2025, but that's a bright spot. While sales for the year were down by 0.4%, that marks a comeback in the second half of the year. Sales for the first half of the year were down by 2.4%. The company blames a challenging external environment and slowdowns in its major international markets, including the U.S. More bad news for the whiskey industry this week. Suntory plans to combine the production staffs at Isla's Laphroaig and Bowmore distilleries, with the company looking for volunteers to take a redundancy package. No compulsory layoffs are planned. In an email to WhiskyCast, Suntory's Alistair Longwell says both distilleries remain long-term priorities for the company, but the move is needed to align production with long-term demand. Suntory had previously combined the warehousing and engineering teams for the two distilleries. The visitor centers at both distilleries will remain open, and capital improvements planned at both sites will move forward. In addition, each distillery will still have its own management team. Hodling & Company in San Francisco is closing its Pier 50 distillery, which produces Junipero gin. Hodling will continue to produce Junipero, along with Old Potrero rye and Hirsch bourbon brands, using contract distillers. No word on how many jobs will be affected. Minnesota's O'Shaughnessy Distilling is finally putting its own whiskey in a bottle instead of relying on contract distillers. It's releasing Keeper's Heart American Pot Still Whiskey in a nod to master distiller Brian Nation's homeland of Ireland. It mimics Irish single pot still whiskey in that it uses a blend of malted and unmalted barley and is matured in new American oak. It's available nationally through the Keeper's Heart website for $50 a bottle. Other new releases to mention this week, Luxco's Penelope Bourbon is upping the age statement on its barrel strength bourbon from 4 to 7 years. The new edition blends 4 different bourbons instead of the 3 used in previous editions. It'll be available in select markets with a recommended retail price of $60 a bottle. Sister brand Rebel Bourbon is out with its second annual release in a collaboration with NASCAR driver Kyle Busch and Richard Childress Racing. The Rebel 108 Kyle Busch Single Barrel Bourbon is bottled at 108 proof in a nod to Busch's car number 8, and Busch helped pick the single barrels for the release with master distiller John Rempe. It's priced the same as last year's initial release, $40 a bottle. Virginia Distillery Company's team has been busy creating 3 new whiskeys. The first is a cigar cut blend designed to pair with cigars and uses 8 different cask types in its maturation. It'll hit the market next month. No word on pricing. The second and third whiskeys are part of the distillery's Brewers Coalition series, where the distillery collaborates with brewers from around the U.S. One is finished in Madagascar stout barrels from Four Hands Brewing in St. Louis, and the second is finished in Old Rasputin stout barrels from California's North Coast Brewing. Both are bottled at 50% ABV. There's no word on pricing. Proper No. 12 Irish whiskey is out with a new Black Reserve blend. It takes the same malt and grain whiskeys from Bushmills as the original Proper No. 12 and matures them in more heavily charred barrels. Look for it nationwide in the U.S. at a recommended retail price of $33 a bottle. Ecklinville Distillery is teaming up with the James J. Fox shop in Dublin to release a 25-year-old Dunbill's Irish single malt. The single cask release is the oldest bottling of Dunbill's since Ecklinville revived the brand several years ago. 330 bottles are available exclusively through the James J. Fox shop and website for €495 a bottle. Glenfiddich doesn't have a new whiskey to release this week, but after many years is ditching its logo and image for a new contemporary feel. It'll debut in a Father's Day gift pack that includes a bottle of the 14-year-old Bourbon Barrel Reserve, along with minis of the 15-year-old Solera Reserve and 18-year-old Glenfiddich. The gift packs will be priced at $59.99 each. And finally, Whiskey Magazine handed out its U.S. Icons of Whiskey, World Whiskies Awards, and Hall of Fame honors the other night at a banquet in Louisville. Heaven Hill was named Distiller of the Year and Sustainable Distillery of the Year, while Jackson Purchase Distillery's Terry Ballard was named Distillery Manager of the Year. Chris Fletcher of Jack Daniels was named Master Distiller of the Year. The Whiskey Sanctuary at Law's Whiskey House in Denver was named Visitor Attraction of the Year, and Lost Lantern Whiskey was named Independent Bottler of the Year. All of the winners will go on to compete against regional winners for the Global Icons of Whiskey Awards to be announced next month on the eve of Whiskey Live London. In the World Whiskies Awards, New Riff Bottled and Bond was named the world's best bourbon, while Maker's Mark 46 was named the world's best finished bourbon, and the Presidential Dram two-term bourbon from Proof & Wood Spirits was named the world's best single-barrel bourbon. E.H. Taylor Small Batch from Buffalo Trace was named the world's best small batch bourbon, and Jack Daniel's 14-year-old was named the world's best Tennessee whiskey. Other category winners are also competing against regional winners for World's Best honors to be announced next month. And finally, Donna Nally and former Brown-Forman Chairman Campbell Brown were inducted into Whiskey Magazine's Hall of Fame. Congratulations to both. You'll find a link to the complete list of winners in the show notes for this episode at WhiskyCast.com. That's also where you can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long. Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Tickets for this year's Spirit of Speyside Festival go on sale Tuesday at noon GMT or 7 a.m. U.S. East Coast time through the festival's website. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts, has its annual Go Whiskey Week this week with dinners and tastings through next Sunday. Tickets are still available for the Wonders of Wood whiskey tasting at the Teeling Whiskey Company in Dublin, Ireland, Wednesday night. The Bourbon Classic kicks off Wednesday night in Louisville and runs through Saturday. And the Whiskey Exchange's annual Welcome to Whiskey show is this Friday and Saturday at Glazier's Hall in London. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Throughout the years, Dewar's has created some incredible whiskeys. But our new Dewar's 12-year-old, that one's a personal favorite. It's the kind of scotch that earns praise from the pros, but still feels right at home in the middle of a good night with friends. Every pour opens up with notes of vanilla, toffee, baking spice, and a smooth oak finish. It's rich, it's approachable, and it has a way of bringing people together. Whether it's around the table, the fireplace, or just wherever the night happens to take you. Look, the glasses may hold the whiskey, but the whiskey, that's what holds the moment. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025, Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Glendalough Irish Whiskey. Fred Minnick is one of the most prominent voices in bourbon. He's also an Army veteran who saw service in Iraq, and 20 years later, Fred writes about his struggles stemming from his military service in his new book, Bottom Shelf, How a Forgotten Brand of Bourbon Saved One Man's Life. He learned that he had unique tasting skills in therapy, of all places, and his intense desire to learn more about Old Crow Bourbon is also the story of his survival. A warning, we do discuss suicide in this interview. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please call your local suicide hotline. In the U.S., the National 24/7 Suicide and Crisis Hotline is available by calling 988. Welcome back to WhiskyCast, Fred Minnick. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been, but it's good to see you.
I hesitate. I'm nervous about doing this interview because this book is more than just a whiskey book.
Yeah.
This book goes into a lot of your personal life, starting with, let's just be blunt about it, a suicide attempt in 2007.
Yep.
Why did you decide to write about that?
Well, I have been kind of like in the whiskey game since 2005, in some capacity, and was growing and growing. And like everybody was always asking me how I became a taster and like, did I really taste these certain things whenever I would have like an extravagant tasting note. And it got kind of like, I was always real hesitant about talking about my process and talking about how I learned to taste in therapy. And then one day I just kind of mentioned it on a live stream and people started like picking at it more and more and more. And then the Today Show did a feature on me with like how I learned how to taste. And I was really nervous about that. And I was really I don't know, hesitant because I was so afraid of like people saying like, well, you're going to teach people how to become alcoholics with this sort of thing,
Yeah.
And I got real nervous about that.
Yeah.
And then after that aired and I became more candid about it, I had mental health people coming up to me and saying like, I have people coming to therapy because of you. I have people getting help who are Vietnam veterans, who have been afraid to get help for years, but because you coming out and talking about it, they're getting help. And so I wanted to write another book. And I just was like, everybody was like, you got to write about taste mindfulness. You got to write about taste mindfulness. And you got to write about, and I was like, I want to write about Old Crow. And like, and so there, everyone was like, well, is there like, did Old Crow like have an impact on your taste mindfulness? I was like, well, as a matter of fact, that's how I even became fascinated with Old Crow. And I was like, I can't tell the story of how I became a taster, and I can't tell the story of how I became obsessed with Old Crow without talking about when I hit rock bottom. And it's there's kind of like a theme throughout the book. Is like every time I find myself in a bad place, I research. Like research became kind of like a coping mechanism. Like I used bourbon as a hobby in a way that sports would be for someone or something like that. Like, but it was not like always in like consumption. Like for me, bourbon was a lot of times in like in the libraries, in the archives, reading old tax records, reading congressional testimony, trying to find out who actually would have invented bourbon, trying to find out who James C. Crow was, and trying to find out what happened to Old Crow. So that's what a lot of bourbon was for me. It was very therapeutic, but I could not tell that story if people didn't know why bourbon was so important to me in the first place. Because like I legit was like, I mean, when I came home from Iraq, Mark, I was devastated. And like, I mean, I could keep a straight face. I could like fake it here and there, but inside, man, I was dying. And it was it took that moment for me to really, to move forward.
Let's talk about the chip.
Mm-hmm.
How did eating one potato chip start you down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, so it is a barbecue potato chip. So this is the stage of therapy where I'm no longer like suicidal. I'm in a position where I'm no longer going to like harm someone else. Like there was a time frame after Iraq where, every day was like, there's a chance I could put a stapler through my boss's head, or there's a chance that I could get out and pull up all the anti-war yard signs and fight the owner of the people who own the house. Like there was a very strong chance every day. And then there's also a chance that like I would just like become homeless because I couldn't do anything else, I mean, if Jacqueline would have left me at that stage in my life, like I'd have been homeless. Don't think I could have been able to hold a job or keep money long enough. And I certainly wasn't going to move back home with my parents because of, pride issues and such. Yeah. But so this is the stage of therapy where I tell my therapist, like, I am not able. I'm able to like survive, get through the day. I'm not getting triggered by every little thing, but I'm not really happy. I'm just kind of, sometimes I feel like I'm going through the motions, and I put my head on the pillow at night and fall asleep to South Park, but I'm not happy. And she's like, well, you're a creative and you're a foodie. Let's go down a path of some mindfulness techniques. And so it kind of started with like a quarter. Like the use of a quarter was to get me to like in a moment of like where I might be triggered, like feel the quarter, feel the edges of the quarter, like and how Washington's head felt on my fingertips. And if there was ever a situation like I saw a helicopter that might remind me of Iraq, or a building that might remind me of snipers, I could feel that quarter and like completely be focused on that quarter, and my mind will no longer be thinking about Iraq. It was almost instant, and it was very effective. The other thing was aroma. Like I was always a good smeller, so I always remember being a kid and smelling someone's fart, like who was like way back over there, and I would smell the fart and I'd say something and everyone would be like, "Oh, you did it," because the smeller's the feller, right? Right. And like I could always smell at high levels, especially stink. And my mom had that too, so I guess that's hereditary. So it's ran in my family on my mom's side, I guess. But the next phase was taste mindfulness. And, my therapist was like, here's a barbecue potato chip. I want you to put this on your tongue. I want you to think about how the salts and the sugars separate, how it feels differently all over your tongue, the crunch, everything. And at first I thought this was kind of ridiculous, but this therapist was amazing. And she asked me to never use her name if I ever, wrote about her. But she saved my life. She was amazing. And so here I was in this moment of like completely blind trust. And I was like, all right, let's give this a shot. And so I put the barbecue potato chip on my tongue. I closed my eyes. I crunch it. And really for the first time, Mark, in my life, I'm thinking about a barbecue potato chip. Like I had never really, thought about a chip while I was eating it. I think I just kind of like slammed them and, washed it down with something, but I never thought about it. And I could feel like the granular pieces of the chip exploding on my tongue. I could feel the salt differently on my tongue than the sugar. And I just was like feeling this all over, and my brain was connecting to my palate. And the whole point was to like bring me to a mindset of constantly be thinking about the present space. And like, because I was such a foodie, it was an easy thing for her to do with me to get me to really focus on what I was tasting. And, that whole point of that was to get me to stop thinking about Iraq stuff and think about something a little bit more forward in the here and now. But I was like, I came out of that and I was like, at this point, Mark, we had actually probably already met. We'd been on a couple trips together. We'd been to the I think at that time there was that Knob Creek, like single barrel thing that they were launching. That was, sometime around then. If it wasn't that, it would have been Four Roses. It would have been one of the massive.
And I had no idea
what
what you were going through at the time.
Yeah. I tried to like, it's one of those things you put a pretty good mask on. I think a lot of people do that. But I took that technique and I was like, all right, I've heard Chris Morris talk about all these flavors. I've heard Mark Gillespie describe his tasting notes on WhiskyCast. I want to see if I can figure out how to taste like that. It's because up until that point, I had not really been a taster. I mean, I maybe had thrown some tasting notes out in an article here and there, but I sure in the shit didn't know the level of tasting notes that I could find out. And so I simply put a little bit of bourbon on my tongue after that, and I really thought about it. And it's as weird as that sounds. It's so simple. But most of the time we put something on our tongue and we automatically think of like, what does it taste like? But I use that exact same technique and just focused on how does it feel, and it's a kind of a laser focus into the mouthfeel. And I really put it in like, there's not anything texture wise like the chip. So I put it in the context of where do I feel it on my tongue? And I was like, I feel it here. I feel a little bit there, but I really feel it here, So, and then I would taste it again, and I just simply would focus on that part of the tongue I felt it most prominently. And I was like, holy shit, I'm tasting things that I have never, ever tasted simply because I'm kind of like focusing on my tongue as I'm tasting. And that was really how I was born as a taster in a therapy room. And to this day, I like to remind people there's not a therapist in the world that would say, hey, after the session, go drink bourbon. No. Don't do that.
No.
Don't do that. That's kind of how it happened.
Yeah, it's the kind of situation where you don't want to be drinking bourbon after therapy.
Right.
Therapy and PTSD and bourbon generally don't go well together.
They do not. But what I would say is that the bourbon world has a lot of vets. It has a lot of vets because that when people drink bourbon, they typically are only drinking one, maybe two glasses. They're with a group. They're talking. It's not really a high like drinking alone, non-social kind of consumption. People are typically together, and someone came up to one of my one of my events last week in Ohio, and he nailed it. He was a Marine, and he said, bourbon reminds me of just shooting the shit with the guys while we were like in Iraq or Afghanistan. It was like so true. It's really what bourbon is to me. Is bourbon has always been a conversation, and early in my career I did both wine and bourbon, and man, I really just always wanted to do bourbon because of the people. And I loved, Jimmy Russell, Fred No, Parker Beam at the time. Like there's just all these incredible personalities that I just loved being around. And it's a shame that a lot of people coming up now in bourbon don't get to experience that, because it's become, I feel like a lot of the distillers have become more like corporate-y and try to mask their personalities to sell more cases with whatever, headquarters wants. But man, back when we were coming up, I'd say those were the glory days.
Yeah. Yeah, today you have to go through 6 layers of PR folks to get to a distiller.
Yeah. And if you do know the distiller and you have his number and or her number and you set up a meeting or whatever, they're a little nervous. They're not always wanting to talk like they used to. And that's just the part of success. Bourbon has become a kind of a victim of its own success in a lot of ways. Just how it is.
What's your take on the current status of the bourbon market?
Well, it is a fascinating study. Having covered the history of bourbon for 2 decades now, I really akin it to the '60s when vodka was coming on board, and that started to knock out the younger drinkers at that time. Today it's cannabis. So cannabis has had a significant impact on younger consumers, but also the pandemic did too, because they didn't go out and club it up like we did when we were like 18 to 24 years old. So their social world is sitting on the couch on their phone or on a bike on their phone. They don't socialize like a lot of other people. I think that's changing, but also, the younger generation does drink. They don't want to waste their time on $20 Jim Beam White Label. They want to go straight to Knob Creek 18-year-old or Pappy. So they don't want to pay their dues like we did, with the inexpensive stuff. They want to go straight to top shelf. And they don't want to drink bourbon every week. They want it once a month, and they want it special. So in a lot of ways, I admire this younger generation for how they pursue bourbon, because they want to go straight to something that's good versus wasting their time on something that may not be as good. The other side of things, like the tariffs, I'm one of those people. I don't think the tariffs have as much of an impact on bourbon as a whole. It's definitely impacted like Jack Daniel's and Jim Beam, but I think as a whole, domestically, has been strong enough to carry it. It was when Canada was something that was a gut punch when they started boycotting it entirely. But the thing that is alive today and still very much growing and doing well is tourism. You do not see like a downsize in tourism. People are still going to the distilleries. And if anything, the Kentucky Distillers Association has done a really good job of preparing the distillers in these types of moments, because what they're doing is they're selling their special bottles at the distillery. So instead of putting them out in the 3-tier system, they're selling them right there, so they get the majority of the revenue of that. So there's been a lot of protections inputted for the distillers in Kentucky. But I think they have had some PR issues here and there. The shutdown at Beam, a couple of years ago, the removal, the long slated removal of the ad valorem tax, things like that was not very popular locally. But I think bourbon will be fine. 2030 is the year that it's that's the year that it's either going to go, make or break. Like if they can keep status quo and have a rise in 2030, it'll be all right.
You talk a lot about the boys, Oscar and Julian.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They helped you get over your fear of fireworks, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so
I remember you writing about that.
yeah, for a long time I couldn't do fireworks. I couldn't be around fireworks. In fact, I was at Disney one time and I was like, "Oh, I'll be fine," because I was well past like the chip, taste mindfulness exercise, and I was like, I have all these tools, and I'm like, I'm good. Maybe had a little hubris about my PTSD coping mechanisms, and so I walk right out into the Disney like area when they're starting to do the fireworks, and I'm like, I physically could not stand there, and I was like ran right into like the gift shop and like hid in the gift shop. I mean, I couldn't. The Disney workers were so incredible. They were like so like helpful and they were just so kind. But my son, Oscar was getting of age where he wanted to do fireworks, and I kept having to pass it off. I was like, we like someone else take him, and he's like, hey Dad, why don't you take me to go fireworks? And I was like, there's not a thing in this world that could stop me from this moment. And so we went and we sat and we watched fireworks, and I had like a cigar that I could like hold and I could feel, and I was like, I was okay. And it was the love for my son kind of like helped me power through that moment. And that was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. It was kind of one of those, I didn't foresee that coming. I thought I was going to have some issues, but I didn't. It was just like, I was like, I'm going to get through this. And now, not only do we witness fireworks, we buy probably $1,500 worth every year now and like blow them up to the high heavens. And we have a contest between us and like another neighbor. And every year we're like, all right, we got to go to because in Jefferson County, they have a lot of weird laws. Like you can't sell certain types of fireworks. So we have to go outside of Jefferson County to buy them and pop them off. But yeah, it's that was one where I kind of forced it through, and it's amazing what you'll do for your kids, and that was one of them.
How do you think you'll teach the boys about bourbon?
Well, they already know a lot about it. They know one of the first conversations we ever had when they could talk is like understanding what I do, and we told them about how their brains are developing and how they can't be tasting this stuff or touching this stuff. And they've seen me do so many tastings. They've been to so many of my events. They could probably pull one off now. In fact, they mock me from time to time. They'll they'll do their like dad voice and pretend that they're me here and there. Like so, Julian will even get like a Glencairn and pour soda in there, and he'll like twirl it around like, yes, I'm getting this. I can see Julian picking it up. Like he's really creative, and he's not a foodie though. Oscar's the foodie, but Oscar's so you gotta have a bit of an ability to roll with the punches. Like Oscar's given the punches. He's not rolling with them. Julian can kind of go with it a little bit to be a taster. I don't know. I think that Julian's most likely the one that would do it. But who knows? They probably would want to they're probably neither one of them are going to be into bourbon. Who knows?
At least they won't be into vodka.
Definitely not vodka. They know that story. So vodka sucks.
I didn't know you trademarked that.
Yeah. I trademarked it. And another guy trademarked it too. We trademarked it for two different things. Like I trademarked it for the actual spirit, and he trademarked it for apparel. That is funny. We talked. I was like, let's do a collab. We never really ended up doing anything, but it's I thought about actually coming out with a vodka sucks vodka. And I was like, had designs and everything. And I was like, oh, this is going to be like a fun thing. And then when it came to pull the trigger, Mark, I just couldn't do it. I'm going to actually contribute to the sales of vodka. And I couldn't do it. Like, even though it was meant to be like a joke, I just couldn't do it. I hate it that much.
Let's talk about Old Crow. Why Old Crow of all brands?
Yeah, so, I mean, not long after the taste mindfulness exercise, I'm at Bourbon's Bistro, and Jason Bronner gives me a pour of an Old Crow Chessman. And this thing just stopped me dead in my tracks, and I fell completely in love with it. And I wanted to know more about it. And then, I learned about little bits and pieces of James Crow at like Woodford tours and in various books, but it was all kind of like the same stuff. There's not a lot of, deep dives into James Crow. And then I'm like looking into Old Crow, the brand, of like, this thing was a mega brand. What the hell happened to it?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, Mike Veach, one of the greatest in what we do. He has us all together. He's doing one of his massive like vintage whiskey tastings, and he starts talking about Old Crow in the same kind of affectionate light that I have for it. But then he starts ripping the shit out of Jim Beam. He's like, Jim Beam is, what they've done to Old Crow is criminal. Somebody should be in jail for it. And I was like, holy crap, Mike. Mike was not one who would ever say bad things about brands like that. He was like always very positive. He would say something like, I don't think Heaven Hill is a leader when it comes to coming up with new things, but when they follow, man, they tend to do better than like what the person who came out with a single barrel did. Like he would be like, say something about a distillery, but then like compliment them at the same time. When it came to Old Crow, that was the only time I'd ever seen Mike Veach like completely, absolutely slay a distillery and their mindset toward what they had done. And I was like, I got to find out what happened. And it would be a long, lengthy process. And I would get pulled away all here and there, but I feel pretty good about answering a lot of questions that I had about what happened to the brand and who James Crow really was.
And we don't want to spoil the surprise about the Chessman pieces.
Yeah, that took a minute. That, I gotta say, like, I felt like an idiot. Everyone's going to get to this point in the book. Hopefully they read it, but there comes a time when you're putting all this work into something, and you have these basic thoughts and understandings of what something is, and then you come out to find out it's a big fat giant lie. And I feel like that's really the whiskey industry. Like at every single turn, Mark, every single turn, they make up some fake story that they didn't need to do. Like the real history of bourbon to me is fascinating. Like the real people behind it, fascinating. Yet somebody somewhere at every turn in bourbon history makes up a damn story and just goes, it just kind of like goes on and on and on. And it's like, there's so many of them. And it's like, I don't know. I thought, like, when I came across this, I had thought at this point, like, I've been covering bourbon for so long. There's like no way anything like this could have gotten past me. No way. And here I am, grizzled veteran in this business at this point, several books, everything. And yet another lie had went through me like, a knife through butter. I was so mad, but at the same time, I admit I was an idiot, and that's part of it. Like you got to admit when you're wrong, and I did that in the book. So
I don't think you were wrong. It's just that they weren't truthful about where the juice was coming from.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. But I think that I didn't look into it hard enough when I fell in love with it. When I knew better. There's this assumption that the old whiskey is not going to lie like the modern whiskey. Like the whole like you uncovered the Templeton thing, right?
Yeah.
So you know when the Templeton lawsuits came out, and you were the guy that got the fact that they were adding flavoring to their non-straight rye whiskey, and like nobody in the industry knew about this. No one. Not a single person who covered whiskey to that point knew anything about that. And I remember thinking, like, going to the store after you revealed that, and I was like, oh, this one doesn't say straight rye whiskey on it. This one doesn't. I was like, holy shit, Mark just came up, found this mega freaking deal that has been passed by us for God knows how long. You know, and that to me, it was kind of that kind of revelation. It was that same level for me of finding with Old Crow.
What's next?
Well, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of things that are next. Like, you know, where I am, you know, so focused on my family. You know, my kid's a very competitive wrestler. He's 12. You know, he's already been wrestling at the national level. You know, states this weekend. You know, I've really gotten into jiu-jitsu, and I'm very focused on, like, you know, that side of things on the personal side. On the whiskey side of things, you know, I do a lot of tastings with people, and I have been the one thing that my favorite thing to do in whiskey used to be, like, you know, research and writing about it and, like, telling the story. But I think, like, doing tastings with people, like either strangers or veterans of the game, I think that might have supplanted, you know, the process of doing a book. So I just love doing tastings with people. I love educating. And, you know, I feel like there's so many incredible people in the bourbon space, and that are getting into the bourbon space that want to learn, and they just don't want, like, marketing drivel, you know, shoved down their throat. So I think it's really important, probably more so now than ever, to have good quality education out there, and also to have fun with it. Like, the whole reason why a lot of us get into it in the first place is to have fun. And sometimes we take it too seriously.
Yeah. I've always said that when it stops being fun, that's when I'll stop doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've all adjusted our schedules. You don't travel like you used to. I don't either. And I don't write like I used to. Like, I used to write, like, big 14-page features, but that's not how people consume information now. You know, you've got all of these influencers out there who are, honestly, like, a lot of them are doing really good jobs of taking bullet points of information and, like, getting in the algorithm and getting people interested to learn more. So, you know, it's my hope that people find you and go back and listen to the early podcasts. I think in your first podcast, I think you had Parker Beam and Elmer T. Lee. Is that right?
Jim Swan.
Jim Swan was your first one. Okay.
Jim Swan and Parker.
Jim Swan and Parker. Okay. So it was Parker. And then number 2 was Elmer? Was Elmer T. Lee number 2?
No, Elmer came along later. Number 2 was Jim McEwen.
Okay. All right. Well, shows you how my memory's working out here. But I listened to them all back in the day.
How's your podcast coming along? Fourth and Long with Jared.
Fourth and Neat. So that one has been it's not really a whiskey podcast. That's more of Jared and I just kind of shooting the shit, and he's really into conspiracy theories. So we interviewed this guy from who claimed he was part of the Montauk Project, which is what Stranger Things was based on, and like he made all these predictions, and they all came true like 3 weeks and 4 weeks later, and it was like, and I swear I've seen him 2 times, and he claims he was like a time traveler, and he could like communicate with aliens, and he talked about all these aliens and stuff. So we go down some weird rabbit holes. Bourbon comes up every now and then, but it's a lot of fun. Jared's a hoot.
Well, I think that about does it. I want to thank you for coming on and doing this and telling your story and sharing it with the world, because I can imagine it was a tough story to read. I can imagine only how much difficult it was to write it.
Yeah, and I've done it a lot, so that's part of some of the therapy techniques that I did was exposure therapy, where I would write it out and talk about it, so it wouldn't have as much impact on me. But I was at an event the other day, and I had a vet come up to me, tell me he got help because I was helping him. And I used to try to help vets like that, like all the time. Once I got past like my stage, I used to always try to help. And I don't know, never thought I was that effective at it. And every now and then I get a note. And that's honestly, if I can help one person out there, then that makes the book and me going out there talking about it all worth it.
Fred Minnick's new book, Bottom Shelf, is available wherever you shop for books, and he has a series of tours and tastings to promote the new book. We have a link for more details in the show notes for this episode at WhiskyCast.com. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Glendalough Irish Whiskey.
Our story begins in the wilds of County Wicklow, the Garden of Ireland, a place where nature moves slowly and meaningfully. Some whiskies blend in. Glendalough Double Barrel stands apart. I'm Rowdy Rooney, head distiller here at Glendalough, and I personally oversee our whiskey making process from start to finish. We do things slowly, and we do them right. We start with a smooth, single-grain Irish whiskey. We age it in flame-charred American oak for soft vanilla and a honeyed depth. Then we finish it in Oloroso casks from a small bodega in Spain. Casks we season and ship ourselves to make sure the wood is still alive with character when it arrives. That kind of care gives Glendalough Double Barrel its rich layers of dried fruit, warm spice and signature smoothness. This is a whiskey at its own pace, and it's worth every second. This is Glendalough Double Barrel, crafted to stand apart.
Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the new Redbreast Moscatel Wine Cask Edition. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of ripe raspberries, plums, and apricots. The taste is thick and oily with baking spices, fresh berries, and a hint of plums. The finish is long with a nice balance of baking spices and dark fruits. I'm scoring the Redbreast Moscatel Wine Cask Edition a 93. Next up, Ardbegg's new 10-year-old cask strength Islay single malt. This one is bottled at 61.7% ABV, and the nose is classic Ardbeg, peaty and phenolic with lemon zest, heather, honey, and dried fruits in the background. The taste is dominated by peat smoke and black pepper, along with lemon zest, heather, and honey notes. The finish, long and smoky. I'm scoring the Ardbeg 10-year-old cask strength committee edition a 92. Finally, the folks in Alberta's Eau Claire distillery sent me a bottle of their Plowman's single malt Spinola PX cask finish. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has a nice balance of maltiness and honey sweetness with ripe fruits, caramel, and a dry, dusty character. The taste is full of ripe tree fruits, white pepper, barley sugar, honey, caramel, and a hint of figs. The finish is long and dry with a nice touch of sherry, and I'm scoring the Plowman's Single Malt Spinola PX cask finish from Eau Claire Distillery a 92. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of more than 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com. Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about this week. The Lefroy Beaumont production team consolidation got a bunch of comments this week after I posted the news in the WhiskyCast community app. B. Skinnerd asked, does this mean there will be quiet seasons at both distilleries, or are they going to operate both with the limited staffing? Well, it looks for now like they plan to operate both distilleries with the same staff. A stillman will likely be cross-trained to work both distilleries, for instance, and may spend time switching between them. Krotz72 responded, I believe I'm correct that Springbank and Glengyle share staffing for their intermittent distilling. They do just fine. And B. Skinnerd replied to that, You are correct on the Springbank-Glengyle arrangement. It works quite well. I was just curious if Beaumont and Lefroy are going to follow a similar practice, as I believe their individual outputs are much greater than the two Campbellton distilleries. And the Tracer Bullet chimed in with this. Has demand gone down that much? Difficult to hear. I guess just too many factors converging at the same time. Hope to see things improve. If you have a comment on this or anything else in the world of whiskey, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and jump right in. You can also share your thoughts with us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. Saw a post from Butler B in the app this week that caught my attention. How does one tell if a bourbon is from MGP, who supplies many bourbon distributors? I've seen many takes lately on how the bourbon industry is shooting itself in the foot by selling bourbons with no age statement, or they are just bottling bourbon and a fancy label is slapped on it. Well, this gives us a chance to discuss the ways to tell whether a brand actually distills its own bourbon or bottles whiskeys from another distiller. Under U.S. regulations, if a whiskey is sourced from MGP or any other contract distiller, it has to be labeled with the language bottled by so-and-so. Only if a distillery actually makes its own whiskey can it use the term distilled by so-and-so. Also, if the bottler of a whiskey is located in a different state than the distiller, then they have to include the language distilled in with the state of distillation. Butler B. was asking specifically about whiskeys from MGP, one of the largest suppliers of bulk whiskey. In this case, if you see the language bottled by and distilled in Indiana on a label, it's a pretty good bet that the whiskey was distilled at MGP. Of course, that only applies if the producer labels everything the way they're supposed to. The TTB has a shockingly poor record of policing that regulation. Hope that answers your question. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and, of course, a complete archive of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. We'd love to hear from you. Download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store, or find us on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
There's something special about opening a bottle of Dewar's 12-year with the people who matter most. It brings out the stories, the laughter, and the kind of moments you don't plan, but never forget. Build on tradition, made for right now, and best when shared. Dewar's 12-year-old.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2026, and comes to you each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.